Following is a class on the Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, 8th Chapter, text number 80. Given by His Divine Grace, Srila Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj Guru Dev. Recorded on July 14th, 1983, at New Kurukshetra Dham in Oklahoma.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When Dhruva Maharaj became practically one in heaviness with Lord Vishnu, the total consciousness, due to his fully concentrating and closing all the holes of his body, the total universal breathing became choked up, and all the great demigods in all the planetary systems felt suffocated, and thus took shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. When hundreds of persons are sitting in an airplane, although they remain individual units, they each share in the total force of the airplane, which runs at thousands of miles per hour. Similarly, when unit energy is identified with the service of the total energy, the unit energy becomes as powerful as the total energy. As explained in the previous verse, Dhruva Maharaj, because of his spiritual advancement, became almost the total heaviness, and thus he pressed down the whole earth. Moreover, by such spiritual power, his unit body became the total body of the universe. Thus, when he closed the holes of his unit body to firmly concentrate his mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all the units of the universe, namely all the living entities, including the big demigods, felt the pressure of suffocation, as if their breathing were being choked. Therefore they all took shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because they were perplexed as to what had happened. This example of Dhruva Maharaj closing the holes of his personal body and thereby closing the breathing holes of the total universe clearly indicates that a devotee by his personal devotional service can influence all the people of the whole world to become devotees of the Lord. If there is only one pure devotee in pure Krishna consciousness, he can change the total consciousness of the world into Krishna consciousness. This is not very difficult to understand if we study the behavior of Dhruva Maharaj. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shannavadi Paskata De Shatarane. So, for those of you who don't know this pastime of the Lord, this is the narration of the great saintly personality, Dhruva Maharaj, who was the son of Maharaj Uttapanada. And because of the king's having neglected Dhruva when he was a young boy, Dhruva determined that he should have a kingdom bigger than his father's, even greater than his grandfather's. In other words, he determined that he should be able to have everyone in the universe offer homage unto him. He wanted to surpass all of the great personalities in the universe. So he took up great austerity under the direction of Narada Muni, his spiritual master. And now we hear about this austerity. In the previous verses it's mentioned how he reduced his eating, his sleeping. Now even his breathing has been reduced. This is a process of mystic yoga. It's a yoga system whereby all of the senses and the mind come under control. Because the yoga process means this. Even we are following a yoga process, a bhakti yoga process, which also requires the control of the senses and the mind. Because the whole purpose of yoga is to fix the mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And because the senses are agitated and trying to always enjoy their objects, so the yoga process helps us to satisfy the senses. Real control means to satisfy or please the senses. Otherwise, simply to mechanically try to restrict the senses will not work. That's why there are different services which we take up in the Bhakti Yoga process. Not only different services, but different positions. Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Sannyas. All of these are meant for helping to regulate the senses. To artificially try to restrict them when the desire is too strong leads to frustration, hardness of the heart, and ultimately anger and loss of intelligence and memory, and one falls down. So under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, one has to be trained and guided into the proper channel for rendering service. So the Bhakti Yoga process is practical in this age. This type of Astanga Yoga is not possible for us to perform, to stop the breathing process altogether. No one can attempt to do such a thing. We get disturbed when there's a mosquito bite. Dhruva Maharaj sat in the forest for many months without eating, without sleeping, eventually even without breathing. No one can imagine such a thing in this Kali Yuga. So that type of yoga is not practical in the Kali Yuga. Each yuga or age has its proper method of religious activity. And in this age, it is described to be the Bhakti Yoga process of Sankirtan Yajna. Sankirtan Yajna has been expanded properly for the worldwide culture by Srila Prabhupada. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu introduced the essence of Sankirtan, which is the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. But Srila Prabhupada showed how to chant Hare Krishna by not only vibrating with the tongue, but by the printing press. Unlimited numbers of transcendental literatures being heard and chanted and distributed. And by construction of wonderful projects, large temples and schools and other type of projects, by restaurants, by so many different activities which make up our Krishna consciousness movement. All of these are part of the Sankirtan Yajna as established by Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada's position is therefore very unique. Just as we see the great acharyas like Ramanuja and Madhva, Vishnu Swami, Nimbarka, they all established the philosophical tenets of their sampradayas, and they defeated and they elaborated their sampradaya philosophy and were able to accommodate all the different aspects of the Vedanta teachings and also to defeat all kinds of opposing arguments. So Prabhupada has done exactly what these great acharyas have done. Prabhupada's act in establishing this movement in all of its manifestations is no less significant than Ramanuja, Madhvacharya, and the other great personalities. Practically speaking, for this age, Prabhupada's action, what he has done to establish this movement, will probably be looked upon as the most significant act done by any acharya in the entire history of the line. Because he's actually established how to practically live the philosophy in this world. Unless we see a totally different situation of the whole world going into another phase that we cannot envision exactly at this point. But given that it will remain to some extent as we now know it to be, Prabhupada has shown practically how to live out a Krishna conscious life in full service to Krishna with full satisfaction and absorption. So anyway, the yoga system teaches us to become absorbed in Krishna. If one does not become absorbed in Krishna, then it is not the process of yoga. It's not that one should aspire for some type of mystical power. Real yoga means to capture Krishna. And Dhruva Maharaj has this intention. He has some material boon, however, to seek out. He wants to ask Vishnu for some boon. And of course, that is not pure devotional service. Pure devotional service is free from such requests. It's not that we should be maintaining some material desires within our mind. But if we cannot help it, then it is advised that you should nevertheless worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whether you're full of desires, whether you have no desires, or whether you desire liberation. In any case, we should seek out the merciful benediction of the Supreme Lord. So this is something that we can advise people, because when we meet people, they're full of desires. The materialists have so many desires or aspirations. And actually they cannot see, how will I fulfill this? Because in this process of Krishna consciousness, you have to give up everything. You have to become renounced. So how can you advise me to join this movement? So we have to explain to them, first of all, that you have to admit that these desires are the source of your unhappiness. That is a fact. That material desires are the cause of unhappiness. Because attachment leads to, ultimately, dependence on something, and anything which we depend upon, which is temporary, is going to be the cause of our suffering in the long run. The senses are such that they burn like fire. The fire is useful, no doubt, but when it is not associated with in the proper way, then it becomes injurious. So similarly, when the senses are out of control, when they're hankering after material sense objects, the whole mood is one of burning passion. One feels very agitated and disturbed. So that's not pleasing. That's like when the fire becomes too hot and you can't control it anymore. So we have to cool down the senses. The process for doing that is this chanting. It's described that the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya, the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda, give us the cooling shade, which calms us down in the midst of the blazing fire of material existence. So chanting of Hare Krishna means to take the shelter of Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya. They are the personalities who have inaugurated this Nam Sankirtan. And in taking their shelter, we find our senses becoming relieved. This is the wonder of worship of the Supreme Lord, that He is able to completely satisfy and control the senses of the living entity. All of the senses. The eyes become pleased in seeing the beautiful form of the Lord. The ears become pleased in hearing the holy name of the Lord. The body becomes pleased in doing service to the Lord. Every one of our senses. Tongue becomes pleased in accepting the prasadam, foodstuffs offered to the Lord. This is the way of completely regulating our senses. So our devotional activity has to be performed very carefully. You have to see practically that all of your senses are becoming completely controlled. It's not good if your mind is agitated and disturbed. That means that there needs to be an adjustment made. Some adjustment has to be made. Because one should actually feel, as the Krishna consciousness process goes on, less and less agitated and less disturbed. If the agitation or disturbance remains, then there's a need of adjustment. It's just like a disease. If the disease is not being corrected, if there's still the diseased symptoms, then the doctor has to modify the medicine. So one has to approach the spiritual master honestly. There should not be any false pride. Sometimes we're very proud. We become attached to rules and regulations, or even egotistic conceptions about who we are. And that's not very good. Srila Rupa Goswami warns against this, not to be overly attached to rules and regulations of a particular situation and not understand what the goal is. The goal is to be able to completely surrender at Krishna's lotus feet. That is the purpose. Free from all false egotistic conceptions. Everybody has a puffed up opinion of themselves, that they're very intelligent, or very renounced, or very strong, or very this, or very that. But actually, when you come to understand that you're none of these things, you're not very strong, you're not very renounced, you're not very intelligent, you're not very detached, then there's the possibility of achieving these qualities. In other words, when we become fully dependent upon the strength and mercy of Guru and Lord Chaitanya, then we become strong. On our own, there's no strength. The strength is Krishna. We don't have strength. The strength is Krishna. Our only strength is our ability to surrender to Krishna. That is real strength. But it's difficult to understand this point, because in the material world, the idea of submitting or being dependent leads to problems. As soon as you submit or try to depend on someone else, you get taken advantage of. Therefore, on account of our repeated experiences, now there's a tendency not to want to depend or submit to the spiritual master's order or the spiritual master's mercy, Krishna's mercy. But actually we cannot make advancement unless we do this. Here it's mentioned that Dhruva Maharaj became so powerful that he was able to identify himself with the whole universal consciousness. This means that when one can dovetail Krishna's desires with his own, when one can begin to think in the way that the Lord thinks, then one becomes powerful like the Lord. And Prabhupada makes this point for the preaching movement of Krishna consciousness, for all of the preachers to understand what it means to become empowered to preach the gospel of Lord Chaitanya. If one actually wants to be successful in preaching, he has to be able to influence others. Influence in such a way that he can turn the entire tide of a person's life 180 degrees around. Because everyone is marching straight towards hell. And they're all going in the opposite direction. They're all headed for sense gratification, chasing sense gratification and heading for hell. So, actually, it's the duty of the Krishna conscious preacher to reverse the tide that someone is moving in. And that has to be done with great love and faith in Krishna. Krishna can reverse that tide. But one has to be able to be dovetailed fully with Krishna's desire. When the preacher presents the mission of the Lord to the fallen conditioned soul, it has to be without any personal motivation or desire for sense gratification. As long as there is still a hankering on your part for sex life or for any type of sense gratification, then that becomes a disturbance or an interference, and the power of Krishna cannot act fully. So if you want to become empowered, if you want Krishna to use you, then you have to give up all kinds of ideas of sense satisfaction in a material way. When you're totally satisfied simply in serving Krishna, then Krishna will use you completely to influence someone. Not someone, so many people. Prabhupada said one pure devotee can change an entire world. Because every one of your thoughts will be guided by Krishna. Every one of your words will be guided by Krishna. All that you act and do will be directed by Krishna. It will be very powerful We've seen how Srila Prabhupada is so powerful. Practically, he could completely move in such a way that it would completely move whole countries, change the tide of an entire direction that a country was moving in. You can see in the United States. I mean, in 10 years of Prabhupada's preaching, 1/4 of the people believe in reincarnation. Only because of this movement. There's no other movement preaching reincarnation. Christian world doesn't preach reincarnation. The Jewish faith doesn't preach reincarnation. So who else preached it except Prabhupada? So, this is a very significant point. It gives some idea of how forceful is the workings of a pure devotee. Because it is Krishna acting through him. Krishna can influence, Krishna can touch the spirit soul of another person. And the Guru, because he delivers Krishna, he can do this. So everyone has to act like Guru. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given that open order, that everyone should perform the service of enlightening the world. Guru means to teach the world, to enlighten them about the message of Krishna, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So, although Dhruva Maharaj had some material aspiration, which he wanted to ask of Vishnu, he took up the process of yoga, controlling the senses and focusing them, concentrating them on the Supreme Lord. And as you will see, when he finally gets the ability to have the Supreme Lord's association, he loses all his desires for material happiness. This will happen. The Supreme Lord comes on the scene because the whole universe now is finding great difficulty. The demigods were all perplexed, and they all took shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because this is the nature of a devotee. When a devotee comes into difficulty, he doesn't consult his mind and think of some way to get out of the problem in a mundane way, mundane sense. He doesn't run to some material shelter like past association or family or old friends. He doesn't keep bank accounts privately, undisclosed, where if there's some difficulty he can, call for some money and bail out. He doesn't do any of these things. Whenever there's a difficulty, he takes it, I'm under the protection of Krishna. I've surrendered to Krishna. So now if I'm finding difficulty, Krishna will help me. So let me use this as an opportunity for surrendering more to Krishna. So even difficulties for a devotee become a boon for his advancement. Just like when you're out in Sankirtan. There's so many times when there's difficulties. Doesn't seem that you're able to collect any Lakshmi. Nothing seems to be going your way. But this is an opportunity to take shelter of Krishna. It's a test to see your faith in Krishna. It's not that that it can't be reversed. Everything has a purpose for the devotee. The devotee's life is being regulated by Krishna. It's not under the laws of the material modes of nature. So everything that happens to us is to increase our faith and devotion, to increase the qualities of pure devotion, determination, patience, enthusiasm. Therefore Sankirtan is so nice, because it is such a test of how one can learn to depend on Guru and Krishna. It's such a nice test, constantly. And those who are able to take shelter of Krishna in Sankirtan, it makes so much advancement. Of course, this is true of any engagement. The Sankirtan is nice because more than any other engagement, you're dealing with antagonistic forces and forces which are completely beyond your control. So it requires a tremendous amount of concentration. And that concentration is possible if you've prepared yourself. Therefore, the morning program is required. You cannot be successful in Sankirtan on a continuous basis unless you're constantly doing Sankirtan yoga, unless you're constantly fixed on Krishna Not just when you're out on Sankirtan, but in the morning, in the evenings, all of the time. Someone who is very sober is able to perform this Sankirtan yoga in a perfect way. And then automatically, when you go out on Sankirtan, the results are there. They become easy. For a devotee, it becomes easy to serve Krishna because of his constant practice of Krishna consciousness. It's not difficult. That's suddenly trying to practice it at one time, but not at another. It becomes easy because all the time he's prepared for it. It's like any activity. If you've practiced at it, then when you actually have to do it, it becomes very easy to do. So the result is that when Krishna becomes pleased by your yoga practice, then he will become present before you. This is the goal of a devotee, to be able to have the association of the Lord and serve him very nicely all of the time. The devotee hankers for this. So Krishna being pleased is the way to make Krishna present. You have to learn to satisfy Krishna. And Krishna becomes satisfied when your mind does not think of anything else except him. Therefore, we have to be very cautious in our association. Our association should be with very sober, serious devotees. Otherwise, if we associate in a haphazard way with persons who are not very serious about capturing Krishna, then we lose our concentration. And that's very unfortunate. It's unfortunate to come to the Krishna consciousness movement and become deviated. That's very unfortunate. It's like you're trying to find a path out of a dense jungle, and you find a path and then suddenly you become deviated. That's very unfortunate. And that happens so often. And generally the way is by improper association. You have to seek out the association of those who are very serious to advance in spiritual life. We may have to serve in the context of so many situations and persons who may not be as serious. But in terms of our actual aspiration, whenever we have the opportunity, we should seek out serious devotees of the Lord to work with, or to be with, or to just take prasadam with, or to talk with, or to chant with. Because their consciousness will act upon us. Just like a drug which is administered for immunity, an inoculation, it takes effect and acts on the system. So association with advanced devotees of the Lord is like that. It acts in such a way to give us protection against Maya. When you cannot stand to be doing anything except engaging in Krishna's service, that is the sign of your advancing in spiritual life. When your mind just doesn't deviate any longer, when it's fixed on the Lord all of the time, and serving Him all of the time, that means that there is some advancement taking place within you. That's a sign of Krishna's mercy. When you get the pleasure from chanting the holy name of the Lord and hearing transcendental topics about the Lord, these are all the causeless mercy of the Lord. You should be very grateful, very thankful. And Krishna will reciprocate more and more. It's not a one-way affair. If it is one way, then it means that you have to try harder, because it should not be one way. This is a question. Devotional service means that Krishna is receiving the service, and He's not an ungrateful master. He's the most grateful person of all. And He's very willing to reciprocate by giving you satisfaction within the heart. So we should take the process of Krishna consciousness properly. The right amount of chanting, the right amount of hearing the books, the philosophy, the right amount of association, the right amount of prasadam, the right amount of service. Don't overdo anything. It should all be done in its proper proportion. Because the goal is to become fully Krishna conscious. When you're fully Krishna conscious, everything you do will be potent. Very potent and effective. So are there any questions? That's called emergency service. That's not wrong. There are different types of service. There are regulated activities, prescribed, and there are emergency activities under special circumstances. But that special circumstance should not become the rule. It should always remain a special circumstance. If you try to stretch that out too long, well, I have so much more to do today, perhaps I can only, read for 5 minutes. That doesn't mean that becomes the rule every day. Maybe 1, 2, 3 days. But then if you stop reading Prabhupada's books, you're in for trouble. You're in for trouble. You've got to read these books. Everybody should be able to score high on these contests. I like that contest. That was good. We should have more of those. It actually inspires everybody to study more. I think it's very nice. Yes? Can someone translate that? The best way is that we should actually desire to glorify our spiritual master. This is the real satisfaction. Krishna doesn't desire to be glorified as much as he desires to glorify his devotees. The father becomes more pleased when the child becomes glorified. So Krishna's greatest satisfaction is to see his devotee being glorified. Even more, he's more pleased to see his devotee being glorified than for he himself to be glorified. It's more pleasing to glorify someone else than to be glorified. The quality is glorification, but the satisfaction of that quality is to see it reposed on someone else, not on oneself. Lord Chaitanya says, Amanena manadena kirtaniya sudahari. When you don't expect that glorification, but you prefer to give it to others, that is the sign of your advancement. So we should practice glorifying our spiritual master, Krishna. That'll make us pleased. We're just satisfied to be able to glorify them, not to be glorified ourselves. When Lord Chaitanya was being praised as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he used to block his ears with his hands. He didn't want to hear that. When the spiritual master hears glorification on the Vyas Puja day, he's thinking how the devotee is making nice advancement. He's not thinking, yes, all of these things are quite true about me. He's not thinking like that. He's thinking that the devotee is making very nice advancement by this. The more he sees the heart of the devotee loving the spiritual master, the more he's happy to see that this devotee is making advancement. Because love for the spiritual master is non-different than love for Krishna. So he's thinking, this devotee is now increasing his Krishna consciousness. This is very nice. Another question? It shouldn't go up and down. It really shouldn't go up and down. It should be steady. But when the consciousness becomes steady, the service will be steady. In other words, in the beginning, we are forcing ourselves to be regulated, but the consciousness is not reposed in a steady way. Inside there's turmoil, although outside it looks steady. But when inside there's no more turmoil, when it's very, very peaceful and meditative, then the service won't waver. So that means you have to go on controlling the tendencies, even if the service wavers, even if inside there's turmoil. You should go on, knowing that gradually that meditative mood will take up. It'll take effect. Krishna consciousness works. It's just a question of time, that's all. Some people it takes longer, some people less long. But it works. Another question? That has to be regulated. You have to adjust that. You have to be very vigilant, constantly testing to see whether your spiritual systems are all in proper order. You have to be vigilant. That means you have to be able to analyze yourself carefully to see how you're doing and know what you require. Regulated, steady service always becomes successful. Anything done in too much of an extreme can lead to problems. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little, don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. Moderation. Moderation is the mode of goodness. Extremism is the mode of passion. That's a training process which Krishna trains us in. In other words, when we get defeated enough times, then we learn to become patient. Krishna is very kind, and he constantly makes us fail. And by this process of failing, not necessarily big failures, it may be small failures, but by the constant process of failing, we learn to become more steady. We learn to become patient and determined. He gives us just enough success and then some failure. Just enough success and then some failure. And this constant changing situation of success and failure teaches us gradually to become more and more patient and determined, steady in our service. It's practical. We've all experienced this. When you begin to understand that you can't be you're not as we heard, there's 5 doers in every action. When you begin to understand that you're only one of the 5, and not all 5. It makes one a little bit patient to let Krishna act. you should study the examples in Shastra. Dhruva Maharaj was patient. He practiced the yoga process for many, many months. He didn't just get it all of a sudden. His goal. He was very determined. So determination also comes by seeing the examples from Scripture of great personalities, or seeing the advanced devotees and how they've become successful, and knowing they took up this process, so if I do that, I'll also become successful. Association through hearing and practical service with advanced devotees. Yes, that gives us the strength for all qualities, not only determination. Regulation allows the food of Krishna consciousness to be absorbed into the system nicely. Unless one is regulated, one can't be in good health, physically, or spiritually, or mentally. Regulation allows for all of the different aspects of chanting and reading, etc., to take proper effect. Another question? Ignorance is lethargy, lack of activity, lethargic, tired, like that, passive. Lethargic behavior. Not caring enough about anything. Few desires. By reading regularly. That's nice. That's part of it. That's not the only way to study. Go on reading continuously through all the books. There's no one system. Everybody has their system for studying. You have to work out a system that's suitable to you. Another question? No. Next question. Be patient with them, but at the same time try to guide them properly, talk to them, preach to them, and at the same time be patient with them. What's that dog's name? Any of the mothers have questions? All right, then we can have Guru Puja now.